Yes.
Welcome to VSANA seminars. These are an educational series intended to inform and educate viewers about the art of viewing stone appreciation. We believe that an informed stone collector is on his way to becoming a stone connoisseur. We invite you to send questions by the chat box, and we'll answer them at the end of the program. We will not have answer questions during the program. So please mute your microphone so you don't accidentally interfere with the presentation. I thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. We will be reviewing the use of trays in displaying viewing stones from ancient to modern times. Guidelines for the best use of trays to display stones will be presented. This information may help you develop a more meaningful exhibit of the unusual and beautiful stones in your collection. The two most common methods of holding and orienting stones for display are the use of carved wood bases, as you can see in the photograph on the left. The other is using a ceramic or metal tray to display your stone, as you see in the illustration on the right. These are by far the most common ways of displaying stones. Probably 98 or 99% of the stones that are displayed around the world use one of these two methods. Exhibiting a stone in a tray is one of the oldest methods that predates carved wood bases. In the early history of viewing stone appreciation in China, trays were usually bronze or low basins carved from stones. In this, the illustration on the right and in the center are taken from the Chinese Suiban Shipu book that was published in 1613 in the Ming Dynasty, 410 years ago. The image on the left is a modern recreation I made using a Taihu stone in a hand-carved Chinese stone basin with marble chips. We also see stones displayed in ancient times on pillows, on fabric, and just sitting in trays or low tables. This Chinese Lingbi stone is a modern reproduction of a stone illustrated in the Suiban Shipu, this 2-volume book that I mentioned just a minute ago. Stones were displayed in bronze trays as it might have been 400 years ago, and there's evidence from cave paintings and other illustrative works that show stones being carried or displayed in metal trays such as this. We can also see the practice being followed in Japan for older stones that have been in a collection for a long time. They too are sometimes displayed on a fabric or in a metal tray. This particular one is from the Japan Suiseki exhibition in 2018. Now, there have been many types of tray displays and landscape displays made. And one of the more interesting type and periods can be seen in this book, Senkeiban Zushiki, published in 1826. The author was Sumi Buzan, a painter and artist from Osaka, a Japanese artist. And Sumi was skilled in making landscape trays based on Chinese Song and Yuan models. This is an example of the Chinese influence on early Japanese stone appreciation practices. So this is an artist in Japan who is making these landscape displays using Chinese basins or trays and multiple stones. 20 years later, another Osaka artist, Himura Tosen, what became well known for making bowl landscapes. And he made 53 landscapes based upon the 53 stations of the Cato. These were 53 way stations that people used when they were traveling between the ancient capital in Kyoto and Edo or Tokyo. I'm certain that Kimura used Sumi's Shinkeiban as a reference or model. Making rock landscapes in deep bowls and trays was popular in the mid-Qing dynasty China, and then this practice was adopted by some Japanese who made similar arrangements using Chinese pots today. Today in Japan, you will not see these bowl landscapes at all. They seem to have died out or lost their popularity long ago. In China, we can still find different types of tray landscapes and stones being displayed in trays, such as this punjing, where multiple rocks are used to create a rock and water type of setting. And these are typically displayed in low white marble trays. It's an ancient art form that has continued to the present. The method of displaying rocks in trays spread from China to Korea, was later influenced by the Japanese use of sand in trays. The use of sand in trays is attributed to the mid-Meiji period in Japan, the late 1800s, and then adopted by the Chinese and Koreans in the mid to late 1960s. The use of a single stone in a tray is a standard practice in modern times in Korea. And this is a wonderful example of a beautiful Korean landscape stone in a Korean-made tray. When we look to see when evidence to document the use of trays and sand in Japan, one of the books we examined was Juraku Kai, which is a 2-volume book published in 1903. It describes and illustrates 2 major private exhibitions of bonsai and stones in tokonoma settings in a restaurant. Displaying bonsai and stones in a restaurant was popular before they held large public exhibitions. This clearly documents using trays with sand if we can interpret the little stipples in the tray as representing sand. Another early Japanese publication, Sencha Ceremony, in volume 2, we can find further documentation of the use of a large oval tray holding a landscape stone. And this too proves that the stones were displayed in trays back in the Meiji. We think using sand at this point. This is what the illustration, along with the bonsai. This is a maple or momiji bonsai in a tokonoma-like setting. So there's good documentation for going back to the use of sand about 120 years or so. Now, the purpose and advantage of using a tray. It helps create a scene, defines the space for a scene, and as I said, just helps define the display space. It increases a greater sense of breadth and depth to a display. Sometimes a stone displayed just in a daisa or hardwood base may not show the complete depth and features of a stone. However, when that stone is displayed in a tray like this, you get a better understanding of the depth of the features on the stone. It holds and orients the stone in whatever position you want it to be, the desired position. And a single tray can be used with different stones. This is one of the big advantages of using trays, in that one tray can serve to display many different types of stones if the scale or size is right. And most of the Japanese trays were cast or made in a medium size so that it would be effective in the use of a Japanese tokonoma. Now, it's the role of the tray is, again, to hold and orient the stone, to help create a message to the viewer, and to complement and be in harmony with the stone. Now, the features of a good Suiban, this is the Japanese term for a ceramic or metal tray. It has a low profile to create the feeling of an open landscape scene. The trays lack holes, as in bonsai pots. They typically have thin walls. A heavy, thick-walled tray will appear to be too strong in appearance. They normally are without feet or very shallow feet. And they usually come in subtle colors, and earth tones are considered to be the best because the tray is enhancing the beauty of the stone. Now, there are different types of trays. Metal trays, the most common ones are copper alloy or bronze trays, ceramic trays, porcelain trays, and other trays. We found nice examples of the use of wood trays, the use of fiberglass trays, and even have an example of an iron tray that was made in the Meiji period about 100 years ago. The ceramic trays are the most commonly used, followed by the bronze and then porcelain. Wood and fiberglass trays are lower cost alternatives to custom-made ceramic and metal trays. The term Suiban is a Japanese word for a shallow ceramic tray, glazed or unglazed, and for metal trays without holes. Suiban has become the most widely used term for trays used to display stones, typically with sand. In Japan, we also find that the term doban is used for metal trays, usually bronze. Dobans is included in the definition of Suiban. So Suibans encompass both ceramic and metal trays, whereas the doban is used specifically for metal trays and primarily those made of bronze. Now, as you probably know, bronze Suibans, dobans, are copper alloys consisting of copper and tin. There are many variations in the composition. And one of the reasons why bronze is so popular for use in displaying stones is it's more durable than copper or iron, and it's more resistant to corrosion. The earliest bronze artifacts date back 4,000 to 4,500 years ago. Now, there are many variations in the composition of the bronze. We can find some more modern-made bronze trays that contain aluminum, iron, nickel, manganese, different minerals or metals. And depending upon which ones are present, you can have slightly different colors to the finish and a different patina or a different look. Also, the strength of the bronze can be increased by the addition of certain other metals in trace amounts. The outer rim of trays used in stone displays varies considerably. In most cases, in many cases, there's a preference for plain outer rims, as you see here, with no decoration of any kind. or a very simple line near the top, or in the case of the lower one on the left, the line is near the bottom. So these are commonly encountered types of dobons or metal. Sometimes there is a design that's made in the casting process, like this, or even like this one. Or we can even see cases where this ornamentation was made separately and then added to the tray. And sometimes we find simple ones, but there's a preference for plain or modestly designed outer rims on dobons, so as not to distract attention away from the stone. Ceramic trays are clay-fired products, and they are often glazed, where they put chemicals on the fired clay and then reheat them and glaze them, or they can be unglazed. Now, in viewing stone display and suiseki display practices using trays, the glazed trays are by far the most common or frequently used. Unglazed trays are really rarely used. And one of the reasons for that, if you use an unglazed tray and you use the wet sand or add water to it, the tray can absorb the moisture, and the moisture can leak out to the table beneath or whatever it's sitting on. Wood trays, we have seen some examples of those. The illustration on the lower left is a nice tunnel stone from Indonesia, and it's being displayed in a wood tray. The wood tray came from the northernmost island in Japan, Hokkaido. And if you just look at this display, you can't really tell if it's ceramic or metal or what. So you're not restricted. There's no rule that says you have to use bronze or ceramic trays. It's whatever tray will give you an effective or beautiful display. We have seen in Malaysia trays made from wood also. You can see in the left, this is a large rectangular tray manufactured totally from wood. And we have seen a beautiful collection of stones, viewing stones from Malaysia and Indonesia displayed in this way. As you can see here, the variations in sand are used and variations in the size of the wood trays. These are a lower cost and often more lightweight alternative to the metal and ceramic trays. We've also seen examples of pressed fiberglass trays. Fiberglass trays can be produced in almost any style and color to closely resemble ceramic and metal trays. At some exhibitions we were at in Indonesia, we saw several trays I thought were metal until I tapped on them and discovered that they're not. They were really fiberglass trays. One advantage of a fiberglass tray is that once you make the original, make the mold, you can produce many copies of it at a very low price. If you produce 20 or more copies from the same mold, you can often get the price down into the $8 to $10 per tray range. These are lightweight and do not readily scratch when they're filled with sand. Decorative trays. Some Western stone collectors believe that decorative trays are not acceptable in Japan. However, we learned that it is acceptable to use moderately decorated trays on special occasions, such as New Year's or birthdays, and these will be used in a tokonoma in a home. Last November, we met with Kobayashi Kunio, the new house master for the Cato School of Display. And I asked him the specific questions, when and if decorative trays can be used. And he told us that they are fine to use on special occasions, such as New Year's. It's important, though, that the tray and stone must combine to make a statement, with the stone being the dominant object. In this case, I've used a decorative porcelain tray made in Japan, and it is holding a black jade stone from California Eel River. Now, high quality painted porcelain trays are often beautiful works of art. These can be displayed without stand and without stones. And so the exceptional trays can stand on their own and can be an effective part of a larger exhibit. Now, the shape of the tray, does it matter? The two most commonly encountered ones are the oval and rectangular. The oval-shaped trays project a more informal feeling. They give the impression of openness and less boundaries, while the sharp 90-degree angles of the corners of the rectangular trays convey more rigid boundaries. And so they are considered to be shin in Japan, as opposed to the goyo or semi-formal ones, or the oval-shaped ones. More people use oval trays to display stones than rectangular. The shape and form of the stone can influence the shape of the tray used to display it. Both of the rectangular and oval forms can be used on display tables, tokonomas, jita, and tokonoma-like display areas. And in these cases, there's a definite front and back to the stone and the display. Now, we also can find rounded suibans, or dobans in this case, and square ones. The picture on the right is a ceramic tray. The one on the left is a bronze round. The important things when using these is that the stone can be viewed from various angles. Now, round and square suibans are rarely used in displays, mainly because most stones don't have a clear front and back and not necessarily good to view from the sides. So it's unusual that a stone can be appreciated from all sides. And the question, are square suibans, round suiban, ever used in exhibitions? Well, if we look, we can see that in the 7th Japan exhibition in Tokyo in 2018 used a square ceramic tray. Also in the Ginko-kai exhibition in Kyoto earlier this year, in the 15th one, another square tray was used for the display of stones. So they are used in Japan, but they're not commonly seen. How about a round tray? What type of stone can be fit into here? We'll take a look at that. This is a good example of a stone that can be displayed in a round tray. At least I thought so. I view this as an abstract shaped stone. Others might see a human form, but I like the abstract nature of this. And Keiji Murata wrote that round trays are good for high stones, such as waterfalls, Iwagata, Four Mountain, One Peak stones. In a wonderful book he wrote on bonsai pots and suiban. Let's take a look at this one while it turns before you. And as it turns, you can see that the stone has attractive features from almost any angle that you view it. This is a Chinese wax stone. It has been naturally polished in a stream bed, not enhanced or artificially treated. We can occasionally find a flower pattern shaped trays in which the lobing resembles the flower of a quince tree, an native Asian tree. And the illustration on the right just has very shallow lobes to it, making it easier to use. The illustration on the left shows a more deeply lobed tray. These are difficult to use successfully, and I don't recommend the deeply lobed trays for use with stones. Now, the size. Trays can range in size from tiny to very large. They can be held in the palm of your hand, such as this 100-year-old tray made in Takeoka, Japan, on the left, or they can range up to 90 centimeters wide, more than 3 feet wide, 3 to 4 feet wide. We find some outstanding examples of bronze cast trays, dobans, in Japan. Many of them were made by the doban maker Harada Horn, and they are works of art in themselves. This type of elaborate outer rim is unusual in Japanese trays. This piece of fine art can be exhibited on its own merits. So nice Harada Horn trays that have not been used so much or show the use can be exhibited on their own. Now, Harada Horn, he's considered to be one of the finest doban makers in Japan. Most collectors of Japanese stones don't realize that two people were using the name Harada Horn. In this case, the father and son. The father taught his son, Kinkichi, how to cast bronze trays. And after his father died, Kinkichi used his father's name to sign his works. The second Harada Horn, the son, is responsible for the beautifully prized dobans that serious collectors seek. Now, the use of sand in Suiban. The desired features are a uniform grade, size, and color. It should be clear and free of organic matter, mud, silt, leaf fragments, twigs, and other materials. And there's a preference for neutral earth tones, tans, light browns. And it's best to avoid artificially colored sand. You can see here, I have a small collection of different sands from different areas. And each beach, each sand deposit, it seems slightly different from all others. And so what you look for is a uniform color, first of all. That is the best indicator of a stone. Now, Mr. Morimai in 2012 was writing about the use of sand in making displays of suiseki. And he wrote that the type of sand you plan to use will vary slightly depending upon the stone. If it's a quiet stone with a smooth texture or limited movement, then a finer grain is better. Well, if it's a dramatic or rugged stone, then a coarser grain would be more harmonious. Yeah, we have brought sand back from Japan to use in our trays. And in order to get two different size grains, I use a sieve. I put the sand through a sieve and separate it into finer and coarser sand. And then I use them accordingly. In this flat stone from Hokkaido, northern Japan, it's a quiet, peaceful stone. And I use it with the fine grained sand so that it complements and is in harmony with the stone. The tray and stone and sand harmonize with each other. In this case, it's more rugged, larger coastal stone that resembles a seacoast, for example. I use the coarser grain sand, and it fits. It's in harmony. The larger grain sand is in harmony with the rougher texture of the stone. Now, there are two methods of displaying stones in sand. One is the wet method with water, and the other is the dry method without using water. Either one can be used in making a display. Traditionally, earlier, decades ago, Suiban was filled with sand and then water. Then the excess water was removed by tilting the tray. Now, Yoshimura and Crivello wrote 39 years ago that when a stone is an exhibit, the water should be 1/4 inch above the level of the sand. Well, we don't see that today. We rarely see a exhibit where there's a layer of water over the sand. We do see exhibits where the sand is wet, but not an excess of water above it. So care must be taken when adding water to a flat surface once the sand is tamped down. I use a sheet of paper like this and then slowly add the water. The paper spreads the water out and doesn't create a crater in the sand. So it's an effective way, simple way of wetting the sand. Then once I place the stone, I use a wide flat paintbrush to help smooth the stone in the tray. Again, Crivello and Yoshimura, in their book, The Art of Japanese Suiseki, wrote that the full power of suiseki can only be brought out by placing the stone in a water setting. And the early use of Japanese stones in trays was that the stones should be associated with water in some ways. They then acknowledge in the same book that the practice of only using sand without water in Suiban has increased in popularity. This was 39 years ago. And what we have seen in that period is the increased use of the dry method over the wet method. And people, when they use a wet method display, often will take a water bottle and spray the stones. So serious students of Japanese and Korean stone appreciation like to spray the stones with water to improve the color, and then to watch the changing patterns on the stone as the water dries. But what type of stones are good for display in sand? Suibans are best suited for stones associated with water. This is what Mr. Arishige Matsuura wrote in 2010. He was the president of the Nippon Suiseki Association for about 20 years. And he felt that stones that resemble islands or rocky outcrops, coastal scenes, water pool stones, waterfall stones, and boats are more appropriate for use in trays. But we've noticed in the last 3 decades that Suibans have been also used for certain landscape stones, such as distant mountains, plateaus, arches, tunnels, and caves, stones not directly associated with water. You also have the option of displaying a stone in a ceramic tray, glazed ceramic tray with water, without the sand. In this case, I placed about a 1/4 inch, about 1 centimeter or 1/2 centimeter of water in the tray, and I placed a stone associated with water, in this case, a waterfall stone from the Ibi River in Japan. And when making a stone display, it's important to tamp and smooth the sand to create a flat surface. So you fill the tray to near the top, not to the top, because you'll have sand spilling over on the table or wherever the tray is sitting on. So there's no set measurement that it has to be down from the rim. And this practice also extends to Korean stones displayed in trays with sand. If we look at this example from Korea, a beautiful stone is placed in this Suiban. You can see that the sand almost reaches the top, but not quite. And learning how to match a stone with a tray and then properly place it is a challenge. It takes time to learn how to do this. So when you're developing a stone with a display with a stone in Suiban, remember there are no rigid rules, only useful guidelines. A great display is about aesthetic sensibilities with the viewing stone as a focal point. There's a tendency in Western countries to try to define everything very sharply, black and white. However, in Japan, vagueness is acceptable. So seek displays that the components are in harmony and complement the stone and project the appropriate season. However, there are definite rules for displaying a Suiban and a stone in a Japanese tokonoma if you want to conform to Katayama's Cato school of display. In 1986, Katayama established a school to promote Japanese sensibilities through artful displays in traditional tokonoma, using various techniques of open space. He sought to develop displays that appeal to the Japanese sense of beauty, refined elegance, and subtle beauty. The word Cato was coined by Katayama for the techniques of using open space. If you're interested in learning more about this school of display, I recommend this bilingual book in Japanese and English, published by Katayama's son in 2018. So what is a good ratio of the stone's width to the tray? If we look in the Japanese literature, we can see that recommendations are usually stone occupying 2/3 of the tray. But we also find that this is not a rigid rule, and we can find stones that may occupy 1/3 of the tray. And anywhere in, this is an approximation, not a rigid rule. So the important thing is you have a acceptable, pleasing arrangement of the stand and tray complementing the stone. In some cases, the creator of the display want to send a message of a feeling of a small boat on a large body of water. If you want to do this, it requires the stone's width is a smaller ratio to the width of the tray. In this arrangement, the light aqua-colored tray is subdued. Thus, the viewer's attention is directed to the boat-shaped stone. Is it a boat at anchor in a bay, or is it a ship passing quietly on the open water to a distant destination? So it depends upon the stone and the message you want to convey, what the ratio of the stone to the tray is. But normally the stone is 1/3 to 2/3 of the width of the tray. Now, placement in the stone. If we look at stones, most stones will are asymmetrical and will have a high point to the left or to the right. And when this happens, it creates a directional flow down towards the toe or foot of the stone. In this case, it's left to right. In the other illustration, it's from right to left. When this happens, you place the stone that has a right flow, you place it to the left of the center line. So the flow, directional flow, is always towards the center of the tray. It should never be leading your eyes away from the tray. Also notice in these two illustrations that at the toe of the stone, that the amount of space left between and sand left between the stone and the tray is larger than at the backside. This is a very subtle difference that many people don't pick up on when they're making displays. See, here it is also a little bit more space allowed here, less space here. And then if a tray is symmetrical and it's rare like this, then the stone can be placed in the center of the tray. This information comes originally from a book by Takeuchi and Murata in 1976. This has been picked up and used by later people writing later in books and magazines, but it seems that for us the best reference on this goes back to this period and their book on bonsai pots and Suiban. So here's two examples of directional flow used in a tray. This stone has the high point to the left, so it's placed left of the center of the tray, so the flow is down towards the center. This stone is just the opposite. The high point's on the right, and the directional flow is again towards the center. So these are two correct ways of placing a stone within a tray. Also, sometimes people will tilt the stone towards you just a little bit so that the viewer can have a better view of the top of the stone. And it's to enhance the viewing pleasure of the display. Now, the depth of the stone in the tray. Should the stone sit on top of the sand or be partially buried in the sand? Let's take a look at that. In this case, we use the same stone in both pictures. In this case, the stone is just sitting on top of the sand. When we do that, there's a gap here and another gap over here. This type of gap is really not acceptable because the stone should appear to be rising up out of the sand, not sitting on top of it. So in this case, I push the stone down into the tray, so it gives the impression that it's part of it rising from the sand. Now, typically we display a single stone in a tray without other objects, but occasionally a small accompanying object can be used to provide scale and meaning. When we use a small accessory item, they should only be used sparingly and only when needed. And they should never distract from the stone. They should help convey the message. For example, when I added this small bronze tempai sailboat to this display, the exhibit instantly becomes a water scene of a sailboat maneuvering around a rocky outcrop near the coast or a rocky island jutting up from the water, but it's very clearly a water setting. And notice how the color of the Suiban, the accessory, and the sand all complement the stone. Now you could use a blue tray, which is indicative of water. But I like this type better. In Korea, we find that occasionally a figure stone is used or an accessory is used with a larger stone. This display alludes to the classic viewing stone story of the Chinese bureaucrat and scholar Mi Fu. Mi Fu, this would pay his respects to a large abstract stone displayed out of doors near his workplace. And he would stop and bow to it and refer to it as Big Brother, and recognizing it as an important aspect in his life. Orientation. The horizontally oriented landscape stones are typically used in Japanese style Suiban displays. This is a mountain shaped stone from the state of Washington. It was collected by Mimi Stiles, and this display was published in the Viewing Stones of North America in 2014. The ceramic tray was made by a US artist, Ron Lang. Now, we do find in Korea sometimes the use of strong vertically oriented shaped stones. There, you don't see this often in Japanese. This is one of the differences between the Korean and Japanese display methods. The tray is a little bit deeper too, and that's needed to hold a larger vertical stone in a stable, balanced condition. Well, what type of stones are not typically displayed in trays? Stones that have been polished, artificially polished, mechanically polished, such as a polished chrysanthemum flower stone, as you see here. Also, certain types of stones, like this Faria stone, has a foot, a naturally occurring foot, that can absorb water. And if the stone is displayed in wet sand over time, it can absorb that water and begin to break down. So in the Japanese tradition, stones that come out of the earth that have a mudstones, calcitic mudstones, and others are typically not used in with wet sand displays. Other type figures, human-like figures that give the impression of Buddha, Bodhisattvas, gods, are better displayed on wood bases. Also, thin stones, those that lack depth, are not suited for displays in trays with sand. Can I use a deep Suiban to display a stone? Suibans like this were found in Buddhist temples. They were used as incense burners and for flower arrangements, and later adapted for use with certain suiseki. In Japan, these suibans were also known as sunabachi, or sand pots, because they were filled with sand to hold the incense as it was placed in it and burned. These deep suibans are popular among flower arrangements of Japanese style ikebana. They were used for stones later. Now, a deep bronze tray like this makes a strong statement and compete with the stone as a primary object in display. This particular tray was owned by Katayama, the founder of the Cato School of Display. And you can find many examples of these deep bronze trays, places where they were made in Japan. Last year, we visited Takioka, one of the leading centers for the production of copper and bronze goods in Japan. And we saw dozens and dozens of beautiful, deep trays like this available at very reasonable prices. So let's look at a large stone, such as this Japanese Ebi River stone. The quartz, a calcite waterfall, doesn't reach the bottom of the stone. And so I don't know about you, but I've never seen a waterfall that comes down 3/4 of the way from a slope or mountainside or cliff and then stop. And so I was told, oh, if you want the waterfall to reach the bottom, just cut the stone. And I don't like to cut stones. I prefer natural stones. So I sought another way to display this stone and to improve the visual effect of the waterfall. So I took a deep Suiban we had, buried the stone deeper in the tray so that the waterfall reaches the surface of the sand. And this makes it a little more effective and give the impression that the waterfall is reaching the ground. In another case, we collected this Plateau Stone in a small river in Colorado. It has a very upper part is attractive, but the lower part is too thick. And again, I had the option, well, I could cut away half or more of the base of the stone, but I don't have the cutting equipment. And again, I prefer dealing with natural stones. So I decided to try to display this in a deep Suiban. When I do this, you can see that the attractive features of the stones are all that you see, and the thicker part of the base is out of sight. So it becomes a more effective display. But these are just some of the ways that you can display stones in Suiban and the use of trays in stone appreciation. Let me just summarize quickly. Trays had been used to display stones long before the use of carved wood bases. Traditionally, trays are used with stones associated with water in Japanese display practices, although in more recent time, other types of landscape stones are used with trays. In making a display with a tray, be guided by aesthetic sensibilities. What works? What is in scale? What's in harmony? And what is the dominant feature, which in this case would be the stone. A single stone can be displayed in a tray with either wet or dry sand. And the Japanese methods of using Suibans have influenced modern Western use of trays more than Chinese or Korean practices. In fact, in the 1960s, Korean and Chinese stone collectors began using trays with sand, adapting the influence by the Japanese method. And that Suibans can be used effectively to convey the sense of seasonality. In Japan, Suibans are usually not used in displays in winter in a tokonoma in a home. The aspect of water and coolness is better suited for spring and summer displays. Now, if you want more information about the role of trays, I recommend you to a two-part series on the role of trays in viewing stone appreciation. It was published in our March and April 2001 issues on our website. And I also encourage you to watch our popular companion seminar, The Role of Carved Wood Bases in Viewing Stone Appreciation. There are many references in English. I mentioned the Crivello and Yoshimura book. I still consider this as one of the better books on Japanese suiseki. The Katayama book has been published in English and Japanese. Mr. Matsuura's book on the introduction to suiseki is good. Mr. Morimai has published a beautiful essay in Pursuit of Beauty, the story of the Genko Kai. And he writes with such passion, and he's displaying a stone in a Suiban is almost a experience of reverence with him. And he writes like no one else in Japan writes. If you want to see the broader tray landscapes that were made, look at Mr. Yanni Gisawa's book. And then in Bill Valavenus's International Bonsai magazine, he had volume 20, 1998 was devoted to landscape bonsai. References in Japan are abundant. The first two is on the Katayama School. Mr. Murata's book, How to Place and Display Stones, is one of the more important books and one that has been overlooked. If you want to see large format books and incredibly beautiful photographs of pots and trays, we recommend the Art Bonki or Bonsai Pot Summary of Excellent Pots. Volume 1 refers to Chinese items. Volume 2 is in Japan. And then, as I mentioned in the Takuichi and Murata Keiji's book, Bonsai Pots and Suiban is another extremely valuable reference. At this stage, I will stop sharing and we can open it up to questions and discussions. And maybe some of you would like to add